Thank you, Dimitri. So, I think we had excellent input. We have diversity of perspectives here. We have quite a lot of provocative thoughts about looking at ecosystems of entrepreneurship, as Steve reminded us, and support systems for entrepreneurship. Michael talked about the challenge of thinking about entrepreneurship as a process of scaling up, not about self-employment. And George talked about the travails of growing a business from a Greek base, both the positive but also the negative signs, and also gave us some suggestions for how to address that. And Dimitris gave us an overview of what it means to think about those issues in the context of the Greek economy. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to engage as much of the audience as possible in this conversation. So I'd like to open it up and perhaps take a couple of questions before we start responding. Think about it. You can ask a question. Christo? Microphone is coming. You cannot speak. You can. Come on.
But you can say the question, and we can
repeat the question.
So, as an entrepreneur myself, one of the greatest challenges, and both Michael and Steve touched on it, is human capital. You know, whether we develop the ecosystem and keep growing in what we have. I think there's a big need. I agree with you, Michael, by the way, about the universities coming closer to businesses. That would be great, but we're so far, so maybe not focus on that. But I would have a comment and question for Steve and Michael particularly. How would you see the country and its ecosystem developing so that we actually train our human capital, not necessarily through universities? I hire people, and Yorgos will probably say the same. And I really say, did you really go for 4 years to university because you can't write an email? I think of that. So what would be a solution as a huge bottleneck that I see in my everyday work for fixing this problem with the labor? We have 60% unemployment, but businesses, I hear this from all my entrepreneurial friends, cannot hire people because they can't find the right people to hire.
Thank you, Christo. Let's take one more question before we start responding, I'd suggest. Any questions? Over there? Yeah.
I'm a foreigner, so I'm going to speak English and I can't speak Greek. But all the presentation touched about the government regulation and the administration being a bit bottleneck. But nobody really gave a solution how we can change that. Is it then change in the government, or what is the solution? So that I'd like to bring into the room.
Thank you. So, Michael, do you want to start?
Thank you very much. So where's my magic wand to solve the government problem? Absolutely. In about 2 seconds, everything will be resolved. No, but let me start with the easier one. Well, it's not easy, but in relative context, I hope we will agree it's easier, Christo. In terms of the training, I think that what's happened in Greece is that the mentality that had existed in the workforce was also a reflection of the way the universities worked in terms of formalism being important in universities, as it has been in the labor market. But there was a change, a substantial change, over the last 2 or 3 decades. Unfortunately, here's the bad news, universities seem to be regressing with an unbelievable speed down to practices that we all think are absolutely bonkers, other than the very few people that are implementing them. Fortunately, universities are not quite so determining, and I think that what you see, and you have seen through the growth of entrepreneurship and the desire of people of understanding that it isn't only about getting a job for life and that's about that. You have a beginning of this new mentality happening now. I don't think I saw that 10 years ago. I think that the mentality of the 20-something-year-olds, much more mixed, much more diverse, is starting to be more accepting of more dynamic and flexible careers, and that is what might give me a bit of hope of things that happen as university education itself is being challenged. You know, sure, both Stanford and we are trying very hard to make sure that we're not marginalized, but universities are not the bottleneck to knowledge that they once were. And I think that people start broadening up the way that they educate themselves. Perhaps we will be disintermediated at some stage in the near future, we hope not. But the positive note is on the structural changes and on the changes in the Greek market. If you think about whether we're helping our case or not, by God, no, we're moving in the wrong direction. The second question is more important, but I'd like Steve to address the first one before we move to the second one.
Sure. On the first question from Christos, amplifies some of the comments. What we're seeing around the world are various techniques, everything from in high school education, teaching students there about what a startup company and a scale-up company is all about, to vocational training. Startup Chile has been in business, as I mentioned, for about 6 years. They bring literally thousands of entrepreneurs in from outside their country, and they're training them together in masses on how to develop workmanship projects and good workmanship within these startup communities, all the way through to universities like Stanford and others that have 30 to 40% now of the coursework in and around venture capital management, the leading, the difference between leading a startup and managing a startup, and functional management within these, and so on. So there are a variety of programs that Greece can model after, should they be interested, should the country be interested in one of the government agencies to be sponsoring these kinds of things. And with the unemployment as apparently it is here for youth, there's no better way to, to put youth to work is get to learn more about these. I think we've seen the U.S., certainly actually around the world, that the best time to start up companies is during a recession or during a downturn, because that's when people have time, they don't have jobs, they have pressure to do something, and they get something up and running. And if you take a look at the cycles, the economic cycles, taking advantage of these workshops and these training can be very, very helpful.
Let me also plug you, Yorgos, if you don't mind, because in thinking about broadening up the nature of education, it's not just MOOCs and the exposure to the things that were unimaginable 10 years ago when it was θα πάει το παιδί πανεπιστήμιο, that's about it. I think that now you have a much broader scope for that, and the entrepreneurship ecosystem has agencies like, you've been involved in setting up Reload Greece, so perhaps before I move in this discussion, it may be worth offering it as an example of trying to educate. So, well, fine. So, as my effort to pass the baton didn't quite work out, I'll have to be stuck with watch my magic wand. Fine, I'll take the challenge. I think that there's two things that I would say. The first one is that we need to clearly distinguish between reforming the public administration as a political problem, which unfortunately is the way that people think about it, and thinking about it as an administrative problem. You know, it's scary, and it's scary in terms of all the major parties, that we have not yet seen a really proper debate and discussion about the public administration as a massive failed case of organizational design. You know, I spent quite a bit of time looking into it, as I mentioned, doing this study in the public administration. So I think, to answer to your question, you can do a lot even without reforming the political system. I have very little hope of reforming the political system. I think that the people that are involved in running the country, well, in the current climate, things are good because they start thinking that they need to run it, so they will need to start shifting into figuring out how they're going to run it because they want to be in power. That's good news. So the good news is that they will need to address the stability in a more than 1 week horizon, which we had until recently. And the reason that that is good news is that we will now start thinking about some of these solutions, and I wouldn't be that surprised that there are going to be some things that could be agreed between them. We need to support them. How would that happen? If you make the politicians accountable for the specific KPIs of their ministries. We have words upon words upon words. What we lack is proper investigative journalism, proper measures to assess the evolution of the ministries, how many people are waiting in the hospitals, how many roads are being fixed or people killed because the local authority is bad. The time that you start having KPIs, the politicians notice, they want to be elected, they respond to them. That's sort of part one. The second thing that you need to do is to think about really taking that as an admin and leadership challenge of turning this massive organization around and then say, fine, we've got this ailing organization, what can we do? There's a lot of things that can be done, and once you depoliticize it by saying, let's fix part of the administration, you have some hope of identifying the bottlenecks, the people that are trying to block it. We tried a few years ago with the then redesign minister and now leader of the opposition to create a program that would be a bottom-up effort that would give prizes to the public servants that would have ideas of reforming the administration. Because these guys are demoralized. And I think that rather than collectively seeing the public administration as a problem, you need to understand that there's a diversity. There are people there that will be the solution. You need to sort out the wheat from the chaff. You need to energize those that can give a solution. You need to bypass the people that are blocking the solution, and finding more innovative ways of doing it might be the way forward. So no magic wand, but absolutely small efforts. And the final thing, pilot programs. And I wouldn't be surprised if you see in places like even health, pilot programs emerging in running a hospital in a different way. And that's a proof of concept. And with this proof of concept, sure, give the politician a few kudos, but also start rolling that out. Michael, if we start being seriously, we could do something.
Michael, at the risk of prefacing the next session, which is about institutions and public policy, I think you're exactly on the right track there, but we'll have a lot of time to talk about that, I think, in the next one. Just a brief comment about talent. I think the issue about talent is, I think there's quite a lot of awareness in Greece about the entrepreneurial firms and the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and quite a lot of support. I think the issue that I see there is a matter of equity or scale. So is this a game for 500 kids, 1,000 kids who can belong to that ecosystem, and instead of having a gap year abroad, and entertaining themselves with a startup that perhaps might have a short-lived experience? Or is it about educating the masses, educating the country about how to engage in entrepreneurship and changing the mentality? That's what I see as a concern. So I think there's quite a lot of action, but perhaps it's at the tip of the iceberg. Let's take a couple more questions. Over there, please. I
think that during the last 60 years here in Greece, the economy has been taking a downturn. I don't see anything good happening during the last 60 years. And I just wanted to ask a question, especially to Professor Iacovidis, who I believe has studied quite a bit on this subject. Are these people totally incapable, or are they doing it on purpose?
Let's take a couple more questions. Over there at the back.
I would like to make a comment. Nobody talked about the taxation. The taxes are very high in Greece. Nobody's coming here to invest in so high taxes. They have to go down. Bulgaria is 10%. Number two, bureaucracy is still amazing. I mean, it takes very long to start a business here. It has to be done in one day. And number three, procrastination. I mean, the people involved in businesses, in everything, they go very slow. I mean, I live in the United States for the last 40 years. And comparing the two countries, I see they go like donkey, instead of going like an airplane. So, all these things have to change. If they don't change, don't expect growth. Just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
George Anastasiou.
Do we have time for a question? Yes, please.
One of the slides from Professor Sissi, there was nothing in Europe. Most of the centers were in the US, in China, Israel, even Israel, a tiny country. I'm wondering if also we have a problem on a pan-European level and we're falling behind major economic powers of the US and China going forward.
Sorry, before we respond, There was one hand over there. Let's take that as the last question.
Thank you. It's a bit of a point that we haven't mentioned explicitly perhaps up to now. There's this thing in Greece that I believe is problematic as well, that is called research culture. So research is always this link between education and innovation, and in Greece it's a little bit of a missing link, and in my opinion it's not only the quantitative part, it's not the fact that it's only 0.7%, as you said, of the GDP in terms of investment. There's a lack of research culture, and research is seen as something belonging more to the academic world. It's not seen as an enabler of innovation as much. And, you know, in terms of the government, in my opinion, what they should try to do is more incentives towards research. So I learned about 10 years ago that in Brazil, another 10 years back, they gave incentives to companies in investing into research, not just R&D, the R part. And they said that if you invest up to like 2%, I think, of your revenue of the company in pure research, then this is going to be tax deductible. So many of you folks have been advising the Greek government, you should keep doing that. I would ask that perhaps you should advise them to do something like this. Maybe you don't have the money right now, at least give incentives. This would change the research culture, innovation will follow.
Okay, thank you. Maybe you should start, if I may start by asking Yorgos and Dimitri to respond to the question about you know, taxation, regulation, and so on, because this is certainly a key impediment to innovation and growth.
You know, taxation and social security. Taxation and social security, you know, taxes are not a problem as far as, especially for services, as far as they are contributing to something. You know, we get something back for them, and we don't have to pay them twice. For example, in the social security system, we, as a startup company, we have to pay for ICA or whatever the social security foundation is. We have to pay also for a private insurance, medical, and we have to also pay for, you know, for a private pension insurance. This creates two problems for us. It's as long as you operate in the local market, it's not a problem because everybody has the same costs, right? Everybody gets the same benefits. When you start to go outside the country, then the game is different. You cannot pay 50% of social security tax in Greece and be able to compete in England, Germany, Bulgaria, Romania, anywhere on services. So it is not, and it's not that we pay 50%, the problem is we don't get anything back for it. We have to pay even more. And the same problem applies also to education. We have people coming in, you know, as, I don't want to jump to a different topic, but we have to make sure that, you know, people become as productive as possible, as fast as they can, because this does not allow us to give them good salaries. We cannot have to train, you know, young people coming out of the university 6 and 8 months to become productive. And it's so easy to become productive in the university.
Dimitri, you want to add anything to this? Or do you want to add anything to this?
Just as the gentleman said, we didn't mention taxation, maybe it was too close to the thing. I did mention that the problem in Greece comes from the fixed taxes, not the progressive ones. And tax evasion is really referring to the progressive one that Michael developed, Professor Iacovidis, but it's the fixed taxes that force businesses to close down because they are also susceptible to fiat changes. Suddenly the objective value coefficient and the zone coefficients will change and you will know where you will be hit. That's why 250,000 businesses closed. They were hit by expenses very suddenly and unpredictably, and that was the problem.
Thank you. Stephen, you have a question about...
Yeah, there's a couple of questions. Let me just finish up on the taxation part. So this is an outsider looking in. I interviewed some venture capitalists this morning, and I also talked to some entrepreneurs. And one of the VCs surprised me by saying, you know, when he puts $100,000 to work in a company, he assumes that 60% of it goes immediately to the government. And now only 40,000 of the 100,000 is now being put to use to basically build a company. That would never make it in the States and in many parts of the world. It just wouldn't. VCs need to have, there's enough risk involved inherently in startup companies without having over half of the money being put into a company immediately going away. To the gentleman who asked the question, I didn't, there actually are 4 countries that in the top 13. Sweden, I think, is number 13, but the UK, France, and Germany are all in the top 13 in terms of investments. I just didn't call those out in flags, but I did have those in the data and the text that I'll be able to provide for you if you'd like. So, so it's still, Europe is still fairly healthy, but falling behind. And certainly we're seeing in Asia, Southeast Asia, and other parts of Asia, a huge amount of growth in venture capital investing.
Thank you, Steve. Michael?
So let me start with the innovation R&D question. I'm an academic and my chair is on entrepreneurship and innovation. I'm obviously going to be sympathetic in general. However, I would have a bit more caution. I mean, it was interesting a couple of years ago, there was a task force advising President Van Rompuy on innovation and entrepreneurship in Europe, and I was very interested in partaking, looking at the deliberations that we had. I think that what we are now seeing is that there is, not only academically, but also pragmatically, probably a questioning of what is called the linear model of innovation that links percentage of R&D to GDP. I do not pay such attention to the minute differences of R&D spending as a share of GDP. It tends to correlate with other stuff, so it usually tells you things, but I think that the effort of focusing on these tends to be an income transfer, and if society wants to pay scientists, I'm going to be very happy, but I don't necessarily, putting my hat on as someone who cares about growth, I would identify it as a first priority. Is there an issue? Yes. Could we improve? Yes. Would that be my priority in Greece? Heck no. We've got lots of places where I think that our leverage, and I'm literally thinking, in a more engineering how to get from here to there, our leverage is going to be bigger. I don't want to belittle the issue, but I'm just saying that part of the priorities that I would have for the entrepreneurial survival of the country would be, sure, be mindful of that, but it wouldn't be my first port of call simply because you've got to pick your battles without diminishing it at all. And very briefly, because I don't want to enter too much in the foray of the next panel, although I think it's a bit more justice than public administration overall. Are they incapable or mean? That's an interesting question. I'd say neither and a bit of both, but more neither than both. What you see, if you start looking at public administration, you see that, like with many other companies, when you don't see performance, immediately what you tend to do, and it's wrong, is that you tend to anthropomorphize. You see a unit, it's not performing, and you tend to assume that there's something wrong with the people in the unit. Not always so, and for those of us who study organizations, not generally so. What is happening is that the rules, the local responses that need to be given by people who live in these very rigid, very structured part of the world are things that they follow. And let me illustrate by just one example. What we know is that most queries, most questions that you may have are not tackled by the public sector employee. It goes a level up, and a level up, and a level up until you have met 30 people, all of whom say, I can't do anything. There is ethnophobia. Why? Because if they do something right, there is absolutely no recognition. You did something that helped growth, you did something that helped health. On the other hand, if you do something wrong, we will sue you. So what do you do as a rational human being? Are you mean? Are you incompetent? No. You don't want to have yourself sued, and you just do what you need to do. Follow the rules.
Thank you, Michael. I'd like to close the session by just offering a couple of concluding remarks. One of the things that stood out for me was this issue of the importance of the institutional environment, and I think this has come up in a number of comments, the comment about education, the comment about taxation. We didn't even talk about legal liability, which is extremely important. So there are a number of things here that have to do with the underlying institutional environment that has to be addressed, which is the topic of the next session. The other thing that stood out for me was Michael's comment about the importance of a culture of scaling up as being essential to what we mean by entrepreneurship in this particular environment, the Greek environment. environment. So entrepreneurship here should be synonymous with the need to scale up. And the final thing that stood for me was the very first thing that Stephen introduced us to, which is this idea of ecosystems. And therefore, when we talk about entrepreneurship, it is not just about the entrepreneurial firm, but it's really about the environment surrounding the entrepreneurial firm. And in that spirit, I would like to say that I think that in the particular Greek context, where much of the Greek talent resides outside of the borders of Greece, it's very, I think, fruitful to think about the possibility that the next major Greek entrepreneur will not be here, but will be outside, will be in the UK, or will be in the US, or will be in Germany or Sweden. And so I think it's very important to try to find ways to encourage the diaspora to reach back to the home country and the home country to reach the diaspora. And that was the organization Reload Greece that Michael was mentioned earlier that we have set up in the UK to try to make that happen. So with that, I'd like to thank very, very much Christos and Panos, the organizers of the event, and especially a huge thank you to Stephen that came all the way from San Francisco and managed to stay awake for the purpose of this session, which is really an accomplishment. Thank you very much to all. Thank you. So we'll take a break for 15 minutes, and remember to bring your tickets back to be let back here. Thank you.
Okay. Well, you had a tough time. You did a good job of moving everybody through. I liked it.
I remember what was my mistake. I should have brought Michael sitting next to me. That was the mistake. Other than that, I did everything. No, but I thought it was really good. There's much more to talk about. Much more.
Happy to have. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ και να είστε καλά.
Δούλεψα εκεί κάτι.